Today we have some pretty substantial New York Islander trade rumors to discuss. Of course, they've been a hot topic lately with the Nazem Kadri signing. Expected to happen here. Today I've seen numerous new players' names mentioned in the rumor mill, and we want to discuss the possibilities of what Lou might be working on to make the necessary cap space and mold his team for the future. We also have some trade rumors around the Vancouver Canucks, and we have some significant RFA signings as well, including Jesper Bratt and Andrew Mangiapane. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As you can see, I'm still on the road here, still coming to you live from Halifax. I was hoping to give you a little bit more of a scenic view behind me, but the sun is just way too bright right now. So it's just really wreaking havoc here on the picture and the reflections and everything. So as much as I'd like to give you some better scenery to look at, unfortunately, it's not working out here. I'd already tried a few times before we had to kind of change gears here and come to this kind of a setup. So ultimately, we're going to talk about some news here today, including some RFA signings, some pretty significant ones at that, including Jesper Bratt and the New Jersey Devils, who just narrowly, by a hair, avoided arbitration this morning, coming to a deal on a one-year contract for the player at $5.45 million. Now, of course, heading into this arbitration hearing, the numbers that were submitted included Jesper Bratt looking for $6.5 million, and the team was only offering around 4.3. So this is more than halfway. This is a big more of a move for the team than the player. I think it gives him another year to continuously prove that he can take last year's performance and do it again. And if he does, hopefully they'll finally give him the long-term deal and make him a big part of the team moving forward. But you have to think, after another contract negotiation that was long, drawn out, and somewhat contentious, that if they can't get this done in the third try, that it might mean that the future with him in New Jersey just maybe is not really going to happen. So at the end of this deal, of course, he's still going to be a restricted free agent, still with arbitration rights, and we very well could expect the same potential process next year. Of course, on a one-year deal, you can't negotiate an extension until January 1st at the earliest. So we'll have to wait and see how this plays out between Bratt and New Jersey moving forward. The Calgary Flames also came to terms with forward Andrew Mangiapane and avoided salary arbitration as well. They've agreed on a 3-year deal at $5.8 million. And to me, if he can continue to play like he did last year, and I think he can, and maybe even do a better job, and maybe even improve again, that this could be a steal of a deal. Now, this will make him an unrestricted free agent at the end of the contract. He's 26 years old, so this buys up one RFA year in the first 2 UFA years potentially for his career. So the 3-year deal will have him being an unrestricted free agent at age 29. But of course, he put up 35 goals last year. The year before, he had, I think it was 18, but in a 56-game season. So if that would have been an 82-game campaign, he would have been probably somewhere between 25, 27, something like that. So he's been steadily improving at a later age, a little bit of a late bloomer, so to speak. But I think with all the changes we've seen in Calgary, we've seen Gaudreau and Tkachuk both leave, and now we've seen Huberdeau come back in the Tkachuk trade. But that doesn't mean that, there's still an opening there. There's still 2 big-time top 6 forwards gone and only 1 coming back. So Mangiapane, who was not even a consistently, player in the top 6, he was sometimes on the third line. So, really, without getting a lot of top 6 time or consistent power play one time, that's pretty impressive what he was able to do. Now, of course, he did play top 6 at times. It kind of depended on the line shuffles, injuries, and all those types of things. But I think really there's a much better chance for Mangiapane to get more power play one time this year. I think there's a better chance for him to be more consistently with his line mates in the top 6. And if that's the case, I'd even consider playing him, honestly, on the first line. I would consider putting him up there with Lindholm and Huberdeau, but we'll see what Daryl Sutter decides to do. But I think him scoring 35 goals again is certainly possible. I think he's, like I said, he's improved a lot. And if he can continue scoring 35 goals next few years, this contract could be kind of a steal. It's hard to say, but if he can't keep it up, then it may not be. So we'll have to wait and see where things go on that front. But a really good signing. I think Brad Treliving has had a really solid offseason here so far, especially considering all things. Like the Matthew Tkachuk trade to me was as best as you can expect. We'll have to wait long term to see how that works out. A lot of that's going to depend on Huberdeau and Uyghur staying in Calgary. As far as Gaudreau goes, I really don't think they could have done anything more. I think it's fair to say that Calgary offered him the moon and back and just did not get a commitment back from the player because of his desire to play closer to home. They can't really help where they are geographically on the map, and I think that really is all it was. I don't think Johnny hated Calgary in any way. I don't think there was really really anything that Tree Living could have done, because like I said, I think the only real main factor here is where the team is located, and obviously, crossing the border played a role of it as well, which they can't control that either. So I don't really think we can give them any flack, even though they lost the top superstar by free agency. So we'll have to see how they respond. But in my opinion, I think Brad has done a really good job in Calgary for this offseason, concerning what he's had to deal with. The Columbus Blue Jackets have signed RFA forward Emil Bemstrom. He gets a 2-year contract extension at $900,000 per season. A pretty good value as well. A player who got to play a fair bit of games last year. Certainly had a bit of a breakthrough in being an NHL player, but I still think there's more he can give, more he can improve upon, get some more production going. I think will be a big factor. So I think this is another great prove-it contract for a couple of years for Bemstrom to kind of show he can be a big part of that Jackets offense. In the Colorado Avalanche have signed former Bruin Anton Blidh, who's getting a 1-year, 2-way deal, $750,000 at the NHL level. And when he left Boston, essentially he said he didn't sign there yet again to extend his career, to not get an opportunity at the NHL level. And I'm not really sure he's going to be able to do that, going to a deep Avalanche team that's going to be defending the Stanley Cup. And if he was, that good of a player, he should have been able to get a one-way deal, and he wasn't able to do that. So we'll see what Blidh can bring to the Avalanche. But to me, he's, at this point, a depth player who's more likely going to start in the American Hockey League and be a call-up option if they run into injury problems. And that's about it. But we'll see how much he can improve. Maybe some different coaching and different line mates might make a difference, but we'll have to wait and see. But I don't see him getting a big role in Colorado either. The Seattle Kraken have also made another addition here. They've made an announcement here today that they've hired former NHL player Jeff Tambellini. He's going to become the Seattle Kraken's Director of Player Development. So that's obviously a big opportunity for him. Now that they have a little bit more prospects in the mix and they have their own AHL affiliate, it's important for them to grow that department. Adding Tambellini to the mix should be a good addition for that. On to the trade talk of the day. There's a few different teams we're going to talk about. First up, let's look at Vancouver. Of course, we've been kind of waiting for a JT Miller trade, which it feels like an eternity, dating back to even the NHL trade deadline. Of course, that never came to be, and he's still a Vancouver Canuck today. Now, there's been some talk that maybe this will come closer to training camp. Maybe they'll hang on and move him at the NHL trade deadline. But to be honest, there's a lot of talk that at this point, I think both sides might just be willing to work out a contract extension and keep him in Vancouver. It's not like the Vancouver doesn't like the player. It's not like they don't want to keep him. It's not that at all. It's just the early asking points on an extension at his age for term and money just didn't fit what Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin saw as a good opportunity for Vancouver. I think they saw a better opportunity to move the player and get back a really good return and continue building this team moving towards the playoffs. They don't obviously have the philosophy, which to me makes a lot of sense, that they should not be giving 7-8-year terms to players in their 30s, and they shouldn't be capped out when they're not even a consistent playoff team. And start getting into the playoffs consistently before you kind of become a salary cap team where you're right up against it like a lot of the other top contenders. They're not there yet, so it doesn't make sense for them to be in that kind of spot. So they've been looking for flexibility has been the key word here that Rutherford's used numerous times, and for a lot of people have thought that's going to mean some cost-cutting moves, and it very well could and could still mean that. But it doesn't necessarily have to be Miller, even though he was a player that was expected to draw a lot of interest, expected to draw really good trade offers and returns, and it's just never materialized. Ultimately, teams like Miller, but at this point, it doesn't seem like they're necessarily willing to pay the asking price that Vancouver was looking for, and there was some reports that just maybe the team and Miller could resume negotiations on an extension and see if they can work something out. I think if he's willing to look at 5 or 6 years and an AAV that works for Vancouver, and he's willing to stay, then there's a good chance they can maybe get something worked out. But at the end of the day, no matter what, if it's not JT Miller, it's going to be somebody else to get them the flexibility that they're looking for. And a couple of names that were likely, well, I know for sure were discussed around the trade deadline according to other NHL insiders. Tanner Pearson's a name to watch, as well as Connor Garland. There are a couple of names popping back up in the rumor mill that were available at the deadline but never moved. Now, in Pearson's case, he has a modified no trade, so there's obviously some protection there that could complicate things. He's got 2 years left at $3.25 million. I was really confused when Benning signed that contract extension for Pearson. Another player getting trade protection in their contract who were not a consistent top 6 player, paying too much money for these role players. that was by far Benning's downfall for sure. And just a costly move, which is kind of handcuffing the team when you have too many guys in that kind of boat. Now, in the case of Garland, again, like Miller, I don't think it's a case that they don't like the player. I do think they wonder, though, based on last year's performance, if he's really a great fit in Vancouver. He did have a fairly productive year, and I don't think there's any issues with his contract. He's got 4 years left at $4.95 million. I don't think they'd have too difficult of a time trading. He's still in his, younger years, so to speak, late 20s. I mean, mid to late 20s. So, we still have lots of teams that would be interested, and I would not rule out the possibility that either of those guys, and Garland, to be honest, is easier to move because he doesn't have the protection. He's, a tad younger and more productive and has a better contract. So I think it's fair to say that a Garland trade would be more likely than a Pearson trade. A Pearson trade might be something you have to add a sweetener to entice a team like a Chicago and Arizona or somebody like that nature to take the team, to take the player on. And he might be able to block those teams and might complicate things, right? So that's a big problem for them. So certainly look for a potential cost-cutting move ahead of training camp from Vancouver. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be Miller's end of the story here. I still, at this point, if a team comes along and ponies up a good price tag, we'll see. But even if they don't trade Miller now, a lot of that is just going to boil down to what they can talk about for an extension. If he doesn't agree to the terms that they like, maybe they ride out the year and he becomes a deadline deal. But of course, Vancouver is going to want to consider taking care of things ahead of time, because if they have a chance at going into the playoffs, they're not going to want to trade Miller and weaken themselves ahead of going into that. So we'll have to see how that plays out. And the big team we want to talk about again, I know it's been a trend here the last few days, but the New York Islanders. Lots of new buzz today around some different players and some new articles. Of course, we talked a bit about the fact that Nazem Kadri is likely going to Long Island. We don't know the contract, but it's believed to be around 6.5, 6.75, around 5 or 6 years for Kadri. And there's likely at least one, maybe two cost-cutting moves coming in subsequent moves here to kind of level everything out, because they also have likely or reportedly have deals lined up for guys like Noah Dobson and Alexander Romanov. But we don't know what those deals are. Are they bridge deals, long-term deals? What are the costs? Lou knows, the rest of us don't. So obviously he's working behind the scenes here to make some cost-cutting moves. Now, Frank Saravalli in the DFO rundown was saying that he believes it's absolutely Anthony Beauvillier that is being shopped and is likely the player that we see get traded. Of course, he's got a couple of years left, $4 million and change. But like I said before, I'd be reluctant to move Beauvillier because of the fact that he is young, he can be productive, and he can be one of the guys, one of them I stress, that plays with Barzell. And, I just don't know why I want to give up on a younger player like that without a significant player coming back via trade. Yes, Kadri's significant, but he's 32. I like the player. I do think it could work there. I just don't know. Just giving up on Beauvillier might be tough. But the problem is, if you'd rather move Josh Bailey, good luck with that. It's obviously been proving very tough. The prices are very high, and they just might not be able to do that. And that's just that simple. And a guy like Beauvillier might be sacrificed, just like we saw the Jackets trade Bjorkstrand. Like, all of a sudden, he's gone. I really thought they would move the final year of Gus Nyquist, and apparently they said the prices were way too high. The Flyers couldn't move JVR because the prices were way too high. The teams that have the space are kind of playing the other teams against each other, and if they're not willing to pony up the big asking price, then they're just not doing it, because they're really what's in it for them, right? And it makes sense. I get it. It's a bit of a supply and demand issue. There's not a lot of teams that can take the contract, so therefore they're asking for the moon. And if thus they get it, no deal. It's just that simple. But so we'll see. I mean, Frank's pretty well connected, NHL insider, so he thinks Beauvillier is the guy to go. But then we see other reports like Larry Brooks is convinced that they're trying to move Pajot. So of course Pajot signed a 6-year deal, $5 million a year, upon being traded to the Islanders from Ottawa a couple of years back. So he's got 4 years left at $5 million per year. Last year was, like most of the team, inconsistent. Finished strong. If you just look at his stat line and the point totals, he was a pretty typical Pajot last year. But we do know, if you watch the team close enough, that, like a lot of players on that team, finished really good, but it was too little too late. Very inconsistent, almost, and at times non-existent through the year. But we know the team battled through a lot of COVID. There was a lot of extraordinary things going on that were really tough to control, and a lot of people were kind of, putting a lot of stock into the fact that if this team can be healthy next year with a few tweaks, that maybe they can get back to being the team that we saw in the conference final. Not everybody's convinced of that, and only time will tell if those people are right or not right. But Pageau, according to Brooks, is a player that's being shot by Lou. And then, of course, we saw reports from Jimmy Murphy of Boston Hockey Now and Montreal Hockey Now. So he mostly covers the Bruins and the Habs. He does have some sources. I've looked at his reports before. They have been right about things. His website and he and some of his writers he works with. So I don't want to discount them. Islanders writers like Stefan Rosner, like they're all kind of from the Hockey Now, syndicate here. So it's not like, they don't all necessarily work together, but it's Murphy's not somebody I want to discredit, but it doesn't mean that everything he says is going to be a case of, legitness. It's just an opinion, but he put out on Twitter earlier, referring to the reports, of Beauvillier and Pageau being available, that he wouldn't doubt if Barzal was maybe available, and he could see Steve Yzerman and the Red Wings swooping in to help Lou with his cap problem and swing a big trade to land Matthew Barzal in the Red Wings organization. I'm like, okay, for one, I just don't see that happening. I mean, he's their youngest, most dynamic player, and are the Red Wings really at that stage where they want to add a huge player like Barzal? That would be, if I'm Lou, I'm not moving him unless I get a huge package back. Like, you're looking at at least one top player off the roster right away. So you'd probably ask for Dylan Larkin. I don't imagine he's going to be available. Yzerman is rumored to want to extend him and keep the captain in Detroit longer. So assuming that they say no to that, then you're probably looking at Tyler Bertuzzi. I don't see Tyler Bertuzzi being a New York Islander. Of course, we know he was an unvaccinated player. And even though at this point in time, it's not such a big deal and important for a lot of things, like it was when we had all those restrictions, but we do know that the Islanders and Lou Lamoriello were incredibly strict on that. And it's just, as much as I think Bertuzzi would be a good player and could be a good fit there, I don't think Lou would take him based on that. Like, it just seems like he's very, very strict with certain things. As we know, he can't even have facial hair, and you're on that team. Like, as strict as he is, I just don't see that flying. So if you're not going to get Larkin, you're not going to get Bertuzzi, is there a forward there that they would give up that would be worth it? Like, are they going to maybe Jack Verana? Maybe Verana would be a player that you would ask for next, I guess. Are you happy with that? Maybe not. You're going to want Simon Edmondson, a huge prospect defenseman. You're going to want something else, too. You're going to throw in guys like Velino, Zadina, a first-round pick. Is Detroit really going to pony up that kind of price tag and deplete their prospects that are supposed to be a big part of this team's future with a player who's in his mid-20s now? I just don't see it. Plus, they just signed Andrew Kopp in free agency. They got Kopp and Larkin. Really, I would suspect that Kopp went to Detroit to be the number 2 center. So as much as Murphy's comments are just an opinion, and I don't think he can really link that to any sources, I just don't see it happening at all. Now, even the Pageau stuff from Brooks, I'd maybe more likely than Barzal, but I don't necessarily think that's the case either. I think Beauvillier would be more likely than any of those two, and then of course you're looking at Bailey being the preferred, but that's tough to do. So it's really hard to say, but all kinds of names being floated out there now from a variety of different sources out there. Like I said, the Barzal one was the most ludicrous. I really don't think there's any likelihood to that. I honestly think that they play Barzal on the wing. I think Matthew Barzal could be a very dynamic winger. And after thinking about it a lot since the Condrey stuff kind of came to light here, I honestly wonder if Barzal could be an extremely dynamic playmaking winger, because he's a playmaking guy. He's got lots of speed. To me, could he become a player comparable to like a Mitch Marner? Because when you think of that kind of a winger at that elite level, that's the kind of winger that you're looking at, right? You're looking at the way they're built, the way they skate, just the way they play overall. Not exactly, but there's enough similarities there with the creativity and the skill. Could he become that? He's not that right now. Mitch Marner is a more productive player, but he's also playing with much better line mates, and that does have an impact on what anybody says. But at the same time, I think Barzal could be coming out with the right help, or at least maybe not exactly, but close enough that it could really elevate his career to the point that he could be realizing his potential, or at least a lot more closer to it than he has been as a struggling center with no wingers. So they're going to be flush with centermen, which is not a bad problem to have. And Barzal, I think, to me, needs to move to the wing, and you don't trade him. He's a big part of this team's future, and you sort it out from there, with Bailey being your first preference, and then you go down the line, and then you consider Beauvillier or Pajot if you just can't find something else to get done to create the space. But anyway, that's my opinion on that, and that's what the reporters are saying. So let me know what you think is likely to happen down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.